Discussions of the P-51 Mustang typically highlight its crucial role in rescuing the bombing operations and securing victory in the skies above Europe. And that's accurate. It absolutely did. Yet what many overlook is that triumphing in the aerial battles marked the start of the toughest challenges for Mustang pilots, rather than their conclusion. The fact is, almost 80% of Mustangs destroyed in the conflict weren't taken out by hostile fighters. Instead, a different factor proved far deadlier, and you're on the verge of discovering the reasons. This is the overlooked tale behind the iconic P-51 Mustang. Let's dive in from the outset. As World War II kicked off, the US Armed Forces held a clear vision for the role of air power. They viewed fighters and bombers as distinct tools designed for separate purposes. Fighters, still labelled pursuit planes by Americans deep into the 1940s, served mainly defensive roles, tasked with blocking enemy bombers that might strike US soil. Bombers, by contrast, represented the offensive punch. The Army Air Force's overall strategy revolved around the conviction that squadrons of heavy bombers could penetrate far into foe territory, demolish industrial sites and vital networks, and end conflicts without the brutal infantry clashes that scarred World War I. This approach stemmed from a concept known as daylight precision bombing, refined in the 1930s. The Americans dismissed the British tactic of night raids on broad areas, confident that the Norden bomb site would enable pinpoint strikes on factories from lofty heights. Even more critically, they trusted the B-17 Flying Fortress, equipped with as many as 13.50 caliber machine guns, to fend off enemy interceptors during tight formations. The notion of developing a genuine long-range escort fighter barely entered serious debate, as many experts deemed it unfeasible back then. Thus, in 1943, the United States Army Air Forces initiated their massive bombing push over Europe, operating out of English airfields, guided by this philosophy. Come summer, that philosophy lay in ruins amid the charred debris of B-17s strewn across rural Germany. In reality, the bombers' own defences fell short. Casualty rates soared to 8% per sortie in springtime, and by fall, the campaign was hemorrhaging planes at an unsustainable pace. A typical B-17's operational lifespan shortened to a mere 11 flights. With those losses, the odds of surviving the mandatory 25 mission tour hovered around 14%. Take a second to absorb that. Out of every 10 airmen venturing into German airspace, 8 faced death, disappearance, or imprisonment. During the infamous Black Week, 2/3 of the B-17s dispatched on deep strikes into Germany either got downed or returned in such ruin they were grounded for good. Scores of crewmen perished, while countless others bailed out and fell into enemy hands. Analysts figured that, at this tempo, rebuilding the entire bomber fleet from scratch would be necessary every 3 months or so to sustain operations. The straightforward fix? Provide fighter escorts. The Allies did deploy fighters from England. The P-47 Thunderbolt showed up in early 1943, with the P-38 Lightning slated to join soon after, but both suffered severe drawbacks that blocked any real resolution. The British Spitfire faced identical constraints. None could venture far enough into Germany to shield the bombers in their most vulnerable zones. The P-47 Thunderbolt held 305 gallons of internal fuel, yet its huge radial engine guzzled about 100 gallons hourly at full throttle. That limited its combat radius on onboard fuel to roughly 165 miles. Even adding 75-gallon drop tanks introduced that year only pushed the P-47's reach to Germany's western edge, around 250 miles from bases in England. Berlin sat some 600 miles distant. Escorting bombers into the heart of enemy land and retaining fuel for battle was out of the question. Drop tanks appeared promising, and ultimately they were key. But the tech didn't mesh effectively with the fighters at hand. The principle was straightforward. Attach extra tanks beneath the wings or belly, consume their contents up front, then jettison them empty prior to engaging. Still, drop tanks by themselves couldn't address the core issue. The P-47 simply consumed too much fuel. Figures revealed the Thunderbolt required about 260 gallons to span 600 miles, whereas the Mustang managed the identical span on just 108 gallons. So, the aircraft destined to salvage the bombing effort was already stacking up advantageously against its peers. But at this stage, it hadn't taken its ultimate shape yet. That's when the narrative takes a surprising twist. The plane that would transform everything emerged for an entirely different purpose. 3 years prior to the devastating bomber casualties in early 1940, Britain grappled with severe shortages of fighter planes and struggled to keep up with manufacturing on their own. They reached out to an American firm, North American Aviation, requesting license production of P-40 Warhawks to bridge the shortfall. Yet North American proposed something superior. They assured the British they could create and construct a brand new fighter superior to the Warhawk, which was already outdated. Moreover, they vowed to accomplish this in the exact time frame required to adapt their facility for Warhawk assembly. They committed to supplying this innovative fighter within 120 days, a remarkably brief period for an unprecedented project. Remarkably, they surpassed their target, unveiling the prototype in merely 102 days. What North American produced was a sleek, aerodynamically superior fuselage that slashed drag by nearly half relative to contemporary fighters. It outpaced any rival powered by the identical engine. Still, the engine posed the main drawback. The prototype incorporated the liquid-cooled Allison power plant, generating about 1,000 horsepower. This unit excelled at lower and mid-level altitudes. However, at the elevations where bombers flew, usually over 20,000 feet, its performance plummeted sharply. Due to these engine constraints, the initial Mustang failed to emerge as a viable fix for escorting bombers. The earliest Mustangs to reach England handled low-altitude strikes on ground targets and scouting operations. They managed to strike sites in Germany from British bases while staying relatively low. But that represented the extent of the Mustang's capabilities then. It was a capable machine, hampered by an unsuitable engine for the critical task. Everything shifted in April 1942 with a pivotal development. Rolls-Royce test pilot Ronald Harker got the opportunity to pilot the Mustang, now in service with the Royal Air Force. Harker admired the plane and recognized its shortcomings, but inspiration struck. He envisioned equipping the Mustang with the potent Merlin engine powering the latest Spitfire, thereby unleashing its full capabilities. Initially, officials resisted fiercely, as the Merlin was entirely committed to British planes with none available. Ultimately, though, they relented for a trial, modifying an experimental Mustang with a Merlin engine, Rolls-Royce's innovative two-stage supercharger, and a four-bladed propeller. The outcomes far surpassed anticipations. The Merlin-equipped Mustang climbed to 40,000 feet and hit 433 miles per hour. This power plant sustained its strength at heights where the Allison faltered completely. Following these findings, Merlin manufacturing ramped up under license in the United States, and mass production of this groundbreaking Mustang version commenced swiftly. The upgraded plane initially mounted 4, later 6, .50 caliber machine guns, carrying 1,880 rounds total. Subsequent variants introduced the bubble canopy, eliminating the visibility obstructions from earlier frame designs that hindered pilots in aerial combats. Yet the standout feature was endurance. The Mustang's larger onboard fuel tanks, paired with superior efficiency, provided unmatched reach among fighters of the era. The last element fell into place soon after. The external drop tanks previously tested on other aircraft were adapted for the Mustang. Fitted with two 108-gallon drop tanks, the P-51B extended its range beyond 1,000 miles round trip. This sufficed to journey to Berlin, shield bombers at the objective, clash with German defenders, and return home while hitting incidental targets en route. The answer to the bomber predicament had at last materialized. For the aviators assigned to this machine, though, the toughest challenges lay ahead. The initial Merlin-powered Mustangs arrived in Europe during November 1943 and dove into action right away. The 354th Fighter Group took delivery first, and the 8th Air Force promptly requisitioned them for escort roles amid the urgent demand. It wasn't long before the Mustangs surpassed the P-38 and P-47 in deployment numbers. Squadrons throughout the Air Force raced to transition to the fresh fighter, sometimes at a pace that outstripped prudence. Certain pilots mastered the Mustang mid-flight toward their objectives. Airmen with under a day's stick time suddenly found themselves guiding bombers far into German territory, facing hostile fighters head-on. So, in what ways did these operations truly unfold? What did a standard escort mission look like, flying from England to Germany and returning? It usually took between 4 and 6 hours. The day began well before sunrise, with pilots receiving briefings on the objective, the path to join the bomber formation, and the anticipated resistance. Afterward, they donned bulky flying outfits, including fleece-lined jackets, sturdy boots, and heavy gloves, as the chill at 25,000 feet could plunge to -40 degrees. Launches occurred in formations, with the fighters assembling over England prior to crossing the Channel. Entering enemy airspace, the flight dragged on endlessly. Crews kept a close eye on fuel levels while vigilantly searching the heavens for hostile planes and the bombers under their guard. Managing fuel was essential, adhering to a strict protocol. The main fuselage tank had to be depleted first, since a full load pushed the plane's balance point too far aft, rendering the Mustang dangerously unsteady. Protocol demanded nearly emptying that tank before any potential skirmish. If foes showed up, a pilot's immediate action was to jettison the external drop tanks via a quick lever pull, sending them plummeting away. These add-ons increased resistance and hampered tight maneuvers, so they were undesirable in a furball. With combat underway, the plane relied solely on internal reserves, regaining its full responsiveness. The clashes were short and fierce, often wrapping up in mere minutes or even seconds. Aviators recalled the frenzy as nearly overwhelming in the instant, struggling to follow swift targets while aware that others were hunting them too. The .50 caliber guns unleashed massive bursts of fire, yet hitting a twisting adversary demanded pinpoint precision. The strain accumulated gradually. Prolonged confinement in a tight cockpit at extreme heights, relying on an oxygen mask, bitter cold, and the post-battle adrenaline fade all led to profound fatigue. The deaths of comrades grew commonplace, with certain squadrons suffering over 50% pilot losses just in 1944. It's worth noting Major George Prey, who emerged as the top Mustang ace of the conflict, tallying 27 kills in the air. Preddy endured innumerable scraps and ranked as the most lethal P-51 operator overall. Yet on December 25, 1944, amid the Battle of the Bulge, while pursuing a German aircraft low to the ground, US flak crews misidentified his Mustang as hostile and unleashed their weapons. Struck by .50 caliber rounds that severed his femoral artery, Prey probably blacked out before impact. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe grappled with self-inflicted woes. German squadrons had devoted months to gearing up against bombers, and when initial weapons proved insufficient for swiftly downing B-17S, they beefed up their arsenals. Bf-109 ES gained 20mm cannons beneath their wings. FW-190S pushed boundaries further, with models sporting 4 20mm cannons alongside 2 robust machine guns. Specialized anti-bomber types even featured 30mm cannons or rockets without guidance. This boosted punch proved ruinous to large bombers. However, the added ordnance brought extra mass and wind resistance, transforming once agile fighters into lumbering haulers. The Mustang's mass deployment turned this into a catastrophe for Germany. Above 20,000 feet, the P-51 could outturn these burdened foes effortlessly. US tactics evolved concurrently, and these shifts shattered German aerial dominance. Earlier, escorts clung near the bomber boxes, repelling assailants without chase. The Luftwaffe capitalized by lurking until the guards peeled off for refueling, then pouncing. The revamped approach from early 1944 sent Mustangs 50 to 100 miles out front of the bomber wave, sweeping the area clean in advance. Post-target protection, aviators could hunt retreating Germans, rake fields, and strike incidental aims en route back. Bomber teams initially resented the distance, craving tight cover, but the impact was crushing. Operation Argument in February 1944, dubbed Big Week, zeroed in on German plane plants, luring the Luftwaffe into the fray. Defenders surged aloft to shield the sights, only to collide with lurking Mustang packs. During Big Week, the Luftwaffe forfeited 355 aircraft, halving their active force. Recovery proved impossible. To staff seats, training hours were cut from 300 to just 75 in frantic bids. By spring 1944, Germany churned out roughly 26 fresh pilots monthly, contrasted with America's 29,000 for the year. Inexperienced German flyers faced off against US servicemen perished in droves during those intense battles. The Germans faced even greater hardships due to severe fuel shortages. Come April 1945, the Luftwaffe had all but vanished from the skies. Yet there remained one plane that US aviators were strictly ordered to steer clear of under any circumstances. The Messerschmitt Me-262 stood as the planet's inaugural combat-ready jet aircraft and represented the deadliest weapon the Luftwaffe ever deployed aloft. It clocked speeds around 530 miles per hour, outpacing the Mustang by nearly 100 miles per hour. Moreover, its 30mm cannons could shred a B-17 in mere moments, not to mention a nimble Mustang. Instructions to pilots emphasized avoiding dogfights unless they held the element of surprise or a substantial height edge. That said, the jet wasn't invincible. Its innovative engines proved delicate and struggled to gain speed at lower velocities. Allied flyers adapted by lurking around identified jet airfields, ambushing the Me-262S as they descended for landings, sluggish and exposed. Even though some German jet aces notched remarkable victories, the Me-262 arrived too late on the scene and in insufficient quantities. Just over 1,400 units were produced, with under 300 engaging in real combat. One might assume that with the Luftwaffe crumbling and the jets unable to alter the war's course, Mustang crews could finally relax a bit. But in reality, their riskiest period was only starting. As hostile planes faded from the airspace, the focus shifted to low-level attacks on surface objectives. And we'll explain precisely why this proved far deadlier than tangling with Luftwaffe interceptors. Consider this statistic. When a P-47 Thunderbolt suffered hits, about 8 in 10 limped home safely. The P-38 Lightning fared similarly, with 7 out of 10 returning. For the Mustang, however, survival dropped to 6 out of 10 after taking damage. P-51Es were succumbing to ground-based fire at nearly triple the rate of the air-cooled P-47. The key issue lay in the Mustang's liquid-cooled Merlin engine, which relied entirely on an undamaged cooling setup to operate. From the coolant jackets and radiators to the connecting pipes, every part had to remain secure. One stray round piercing any of those elements would cause the coolant to leak, leading to rapid overheating and engine failure. The flyer might squeeze out 10 to 20 minutes of flying time before catastrophe struck, and if base was beyond that distance, escape was impossible. Conversely, the P-47's air-cooled radial power plant protruded forward like a 2,400-pound fortress of steel and alloy. Without vulnerable cooling lines to breach, the engine doubled as armour plating. If you're curious about the sheer volume of German defences aimed skyward, the figures were downright overwhelming. Their flak network involved more than 1 million troops manning some 9,000 heavy artillery pieces, mainly 88mm flak guns, plus 30,000 smaller weapons in 20mm and 37mm sizes. Rail lines turned into particularly lethal hunting grounds, fitted with specialised flak rail cars boasting twin or quadruple mounts. To strike a surface target accurately, a pilot had to maintain a steady, level path below 500 feet. Such a predictable line allowed gunners a straightforward opportunity against a plane with limited evasion options. Attempting a follow-up run on the identical spot was akin to signing one's own death warrant, as defenders could anticipate the trajectory precisely. At those heights, ejection offered no salvation. Struck at 200 feet, a pilot lacked the seconds needed to jettison the canopy, disentangle from the wreckage, deploy the chute, and avoid slamming into the earth. Out of approximately 2,500 P-51s destroyed over the conflict, just around 550 fell to confirmed enemy fighters. The vast majority, close to 80%, met their end from flak, mishaps during strafing runs or breakdowns. For those who endured a crash landing, fresh nightmares awaited. From 1943 onward, Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels spearheaded an effort rebranding Allied pilots and crews as Terrorflieger, terror bombers, and Luftgangster, air gangsters. The messaging portrayed them as lawless thugs, earning rewards for civilian deaths. That August, Heinrich Himmler directed SS and police units to stand aside during clashes between civilians and captured airmen. This amounted to official sanction for executing any Allied survivors drifting down by parachute over Germany. Records show at least 3,000 incidents of vigilante justice, resulting in more than 1,000 Allied aircrew deaths. Those who eluded the crowds and entered formal POW camps endured grim circumstances. Numerous liberated pilots at war's close tipped the scales at scarcely 90 pounds. Yet even as European hostilities halted, the conflict persisted elsewhere, and so did the Mustang saga. Far away in the Pacific theatre, an entirely novel peril loomed, one unrelated to enemy planes or flak barrages. Seizing Iwo Jima in March 1945 transformed operations for the P-51. This small volcanic outpost lay 790 miles south of Tokyo, and with it under US control, the Japanese homeland at last lay within fighter range. These operations pushed the limits of the P-51's capabilities, just making it within range. Flights originating from Iwo Jima earned a reputation as ultra-long-range endeavours, ranking among the toughest aerial assignments of World War II. The inaugural such sortie departed on April 7, 1945, with 96 Mustangs providing cover for 100 B-29s targeting sites on Honshu. Japanese interceptors scrambled to engage, and in the ensuing dogfights, Mustang crews reported downing 21 adversary planes. At first glance, it seemed the Pacific theatre might deliver the intense air battles familiar from European skies. Yet these outings differed profoundly from prior experiences. The journey from Iwo Jima to the vicinity of Tokyo and return spanned about 1,500 miles, mostly across vast expanses of water. Lacking visual references for navigation, with no settlements in sight, just endless sea stretching in all directions for hours. Pilots faced unprecedented isolation. In Europe, a minor course deviation might land you over an unintended village, but across the Pacific, even that slight mistake could lead to vanishing without a trace. A mere 1-degree drift in direction might leave a flyer circling until fuel exhaustion, surrounded solely by ocean swells. To counter such perils, the armed forces set up air-sea rescue systems aimed at rescuing downed aviators. Submarines positioned at regular intervals dotted the sea. Destroyer escorts cruised the area. B-29s conducted offshore sweeps, and Catalina seaplanes waited poised for recovery operations. These measures rescued numerous crew members who might otherwise have been lost forever, though countless others ditched too remotely for aid or evaded detection in time. By the summer of 1945, encounters with Japanese fighters had grown scarce, as their land and sea-based aviation units dwindled to skeletons, leaving behind green recruits ill-equipped for combat. The sporadic victories in air in the war's closing phase tended to be lopsided American triumphs. Still, danger persisted unabated. The deadliest day for the P-51 Mustang throughout its history unfolded on June 1, 1945, infamously dubbed Black Friday. That dawn, 184 Mustangs launched from Iwo Jima to shield BA-29 striking Osaka. Initial weather reports suggested a nearing weather system could be skirted at 10,000 feet altitude. The forecast proved inaccurate, thrusting the formation into a colossal tempest. With no path above or flanking it, aviators plunged into conditions of virtually no visibility, battling ferocious turbulence, freezing buildup, pelting hail, and downpours. Squadrons fragmented on contact. Planes flying in close proximity seconds before scattered into the turmoil, unable to regroup. Collisions erupted within the groups almost immediately. Though most turned around eventually, the toll was already steep. 27 Mustangs were lost that day, claiming 24 pilots' lives, with just one attributed to hostile fire. Nature's fury took the others. This marked the heaviest single-day toll for P-51s across both theatres, and the Japanese played virtually no role. The pattern held through the war's endgame. From July 1st to August 15th, 1945, 85 US fighter pilots perished on these extended-range patrols, but only a few succumbed to enemy fire. The majority fell to engine trouble, navigation slips over remote waters, or brutal conditions. When the final flight departed on August 14th, the VLR effort had exacted a price exceeding 130 Mustangs and their crews. Arguably, the most poignant coda to the Mustang's World War II saga involved this young officer, First Lieutenant Felix Philipp Schlamberg, a 19-year-old Jewish academic standout from Brooklyn who found himself at Iwo Jima piloting P-51s amid the conflict's dying embers, when victory loomed imminent for all. On the evening of August 14, 1945, he joined his squadron mates in a Quonset hut briefing. The atomic strikes on Hiroshima and Nagasaki had already occurred, rendering Japan's capitulation all but certain within hours. Rather than cease operations, however, orders came to prepare for a dawn raid targeting airfields outside Tokyo. Captain Jerry Yellen, slated to command the group, recalled Schlamberg confiding in a hush during the session. He sensed that joining this flight meant not returning. Yellen urged him to consult the flight surgeon for medical excusal, but Schlamberg declined. Come the morning of August 15, 1945, as Emperor Hirohito taped his capitulation address from a Tokyo studio, Yellen and Schlamberg roared off Iwo Jima's runway, oblivious to the impending peace. The abort signal __, quote _3, _ failed to transmit via radio. Spotting their objectives, the pair raked the runways with gunfire as instructed, drawing flak during withdrawal. In their evasive climb, they entered a dense cloud layer. Emerging on the far side, Yellen realized Schlamberg was gone. He orbited and scanned futilely. Then, with tanks nearing empty, headed homeward. Touching down at Iwo Jima, he discovered the war had concluded 3 hours prior. What H will likely never uncover the exact fate of Philipp Schlamberg. Perhaps he lost his bearings amid the overcast skies, or maybe enemy flak struck his plane. Neither his remains nor his aircraft were ever recovered. At just 19, he had a premonition that this flight would be his last. He holds the sombre distinction of being the final American combat casualty of World War II, vanishing during what proved to be the nation's ultimate operation in that global struggle. By the time hostilities ceased, production had yielded almost 15,000 Mustangs. These fighters continued active duty for many years beyond the war. Then, with the outbreak of the Korean War in 1950, stored units were reactivated and redeployed as the F-51, undertaking close air support roles. Their impressive endurance remained valuable for sorties launched from Japanese airfields. Yet by then, the Mustang had become outdated. Soviet MiG-15 jets surpassed it in every way, and come 1953, jet fighters dominated the skies, ending the Mustang's frontline era for good. Those that endured transformed into prized artefacts for collectors, meticulously refurbished and showcased at aviation events, fetching sky-high prices among hobbyists who experience them only in peacetime skies. Still, it's profound to reflect on their true origins as instruments of battle, far removed from static displays, and the harrowing trials faced by the pilots who risked everything in them to secure victory in that conflict.